happy to introduce our speaker for today, Fanny Yayi Bondje. Before I introduce her, I just wanted to recognize Jennifer Hara, our district scholarship chair. She oversees the global grant scholarships for our district, and that's the reason Fanny is here today. So Fanny is a Cameroonian-American. She has a passion for working at the grassroots level in development in the humanitarian sector. She's a firm believer in focusing on impacts over intentions in her work. Fanny has a master's degree in humanitarian aid and conflict resolution from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, which is a very favorite destination for global grant scholars. She has a BA in politics, human rights, and development from NYU. Her work has taken her to over 5 continents. She's currently a program associate on the Evaluation and Adaptive Learning team at Results for Development. At R4D, she is creating development solutions to support governance and accountability mechanisms for local community health systems in Mali and Cote d'Ivoire. Fanny has also worked with youth support and development, refugee assistance, and community health systems in South America and West Africa. When she's not working, Fanny loves to read and travel and is studying the role of dance in the Afro diaspora across the Americas. So I turn it over to you, Fanny.
Today, I'll actually be presenting primarily on the Rotary Youth Exchange Program. So as May mentioned, I was a global grant recipient for the year 2020. But I thought it'd be really great for me to take a step back and actually walk us through how I got there. You all have another global grant scholar this year, Chris, so you'll get an opportunity to hear more about the program and all the amazing work it does. But I also wanted to highlight the Rotary Youth Exchange Program, especially with this amazing focus of youth that I know the district is really pushing forward, and as well as hearing these grants you all are pursuing as well. So just a quick overview. We'll talk a little bit about the exchange program. And my goal today is to not necessarily walk you through the program itself, but to think through the impact it has on me and so many other recipients and participants of such program. I think as Rotarians, you all are part of so many different service activities and programs. And I think the exchange program is one of those kind of hidden secret weapon that's always there and kind of in the background, but may not necessarily be in the front line, but it has so much impact and so much value. So by the end of this presentation, I hope maybe we'll have some more interest in the exchange program and how you all can participate as a club. So to take us a step a little bit more back, as May mentioned, I'm from Cameroon. I was born in Cameroon and moved to the US at the age of 8. And I always like to mention this because it has had a big influence in my personal life, obviously, in terms of my values, but also why I wanted to start my work in the development and humanitarianism sector. Like many countries, Cameroon is a very complex place. You'll find there's about 260 plus languages. There's probably the best grilled fish you'll have in the world. I might be biased about that. But there's also pain and sorrow in the marginalization the Anglophone people in the country face day to day. And for me personally, it's caused almost kind of like an identity crisis, right? Never being necessarily fully Cameroonian, never being necessarily fully American, which I feel like a lot of people can relate to. So with that, at an early age, or perhaps when I was in high school, I had this idea of maybe not in the same language and vocabulary, but what if I just kind of focused on belonging to myself first, right? And with that, it gave me the curiosity and opportunity to want to do an exchange program. I figured if I could move once, why not try it again and see what happens. So with that, I came along the Rotary Youth Exchange Program. And this exchange program is quite unique. if I do say so myself, it's focusing on building peace one young person at a time. And you'll find there's a lot of youth programs out there, AFS, all these different amazing programs. But I think what makes Rotaries so special is because it's connection to not just going out there and having fun, but actually thinking about service, right? So this exchange program, the students get to connect not just with themselves, but with Rotary clubs. They're matched with a club in this other country that they go to. And there's this aspect of being a global ambassador and thinking about what service above self looks like. So that was one of the main things that attracted me to this program. And on the program itself, you have an opportunity to either do a long-term exchange, which is about 9 to 12 months, or doing a short-term exchange, which can vary from a few weeks to a month or so. And it's actually a really cost-effective program. So a lot of exchange programs, you have to do not just the fees in terms of flights and all these different things, but admin fees. But one thing about Rotary that makes it so special is cost effective because of all the volunteers, the Rotarians that pour not just time, but genuinely their heart and soul into it. And it shows, it really does show in the impact of not just being thrown in a different country, but having support the entire way through. So prior to my departure, there was a 1-year kind of training where we had orientations, thinking through culture sensitivities and how to really be this global ambassador. And while I was on my exchange program as well, I connected with the Rotary Club in Belgium, where I eventually went, spoiler alert, and got to attend the Rotary Club meetings such as these, got to participate in different service projects. So I think what makes Rotary's Youth Exchange so special is that anyone, I think, can do the job of kind of being an exchange mentor or being part of this program, but Rotary's is really unique in that you walk us through, you're there, and there's support the entire way through, and that makes a huge difference at such a young age, especially. And so for me personally, I got the opportunity to go to Brussels, Belgium. And I was sponsored by the Rotary Club of Ellicott City. And I say sponsored because it was a mentorship, but also financial sponsorship. As I mentioned, my family, my mom and I, we moved to the US at a young age. So being a single mother, the idea of financing anything like this is quite big. Her goal was, we just are moving one place, nowhere else. So this was a lot to take on. And I remember I'd applied to a few programs. I was even in this process for the Rotary Youth Exchange for a few months and still had no idea how I was going to finance this opportunity. But luckily got this amazing sponsorship from the Rotary Club of Ellicott City. And I can still say till today that was probably one of my biggest life turning points and the reason why I'm standing here today. So that was the start of it. I was able to live with 3 different host families on this exchange program. I went to a Belgian school. I traveled to 13 different countries around Europe. I made friends from all over the world. And an extra thing that's not on there, I gained about 10 beautiful pounds from all the fries and chocolate in Belgium. So just to say, and I really want to highlight this aspect on friends across the globe, because from there, it wasn't just being in a new country and learning about the Belgian culture, but it was gaining new perspective to the world around me. So I had friends from Brazil and thinking through, their history in terms of their dictatorship, not just from what you see on paper, but what did that look like and how does it still have an effect in the present day life? And I think it really pushed on this aspect of building a global camaraderie, and I like to call it sort of a global joy. So building empathy and respect and responsibility to see a country not just as a country on the map or something you see on the headlines, but there's faces behind that country and there's history behind it that you get to learn through other individuals. And I even got so lucky to continue these friendships, and 2 years ago, I went on a backpacking trip through the south of Brazil. And so my goal was to go from around Uruguay area all the way up to the state of Rio. And in each state I was in Brazil, I was able to stay with a Rotary Youth Exchange friend that I had made. This year I went to Colombia, I went to Bogota, also similar. I like to backpack. And I stayed with a Rotary Youth Exchange friend. So these connections are lifelong, and not just serve a personal growth, but also contributed a lot to my professional experience and worldly understanding. And, you know, I mentioned food, stories, and movement because there's a new idea now to thinking about ingredients that are put into foods and movements. I mentioned that because of I love to dance. And so for me, it was so beautiful to see and understand different histories and connections and seeing how dance can really be a powerful way to speak beyond words. And so I mentioned Brazil because that's one of my closest friends, seeing how samba and seeing how capoeira, all these different dances have meaning and purpose behind them. And at the end of it, you know, I always say Cameroon is a home to me, but I ended up building kind of this new home. And this was on the last day of my exchange program before we all started crying. And I had built this incredible family and home that I still connect with. And I'm just highlighting this because this is just my story, but it's a very similar story for so many exchange students that get to have this experience that is very much life-changing. So leading from this exchange program, I was able to attend New York University to pursue my undergraduate degree. And the confidence that I gained from this exchange program allowed me to continue to be curious and want to put myself out there. And so I did a semester in Shanghai, China, and I did a year exchange program again in Argentina. And I mentioned Shanghai because that was particularly a very interesting time I always told my friends and family, anytime I stepped outside of my dorm, there was almost a guarantee that I would get pointed at, laughed at, people asking me to take pictures, just because I stuck out like a sore thumb in Shanghai. And I really had to push myself to try to think about how to find grace and humility so that I could still learn about the country without having maybe this sour taste in my mouth. And I remember I was at a hostel once and I was staying with this one girl also from China. And she, you know, with my very limited Mandarin skills and her very limited English skills, she was talking to me about her family and her goals. And it just hit me, you know, while we may have so many differences and those should be celebrated, there's also so much that we have in common. And so I use this phrase, just like me, because I remember thinking, she was talking about her brother. I was like, wow, just like me, she also has an annoying brother. Just like me, you know, she has goals and she wants to pursue her graduate degree. And so I don't know, I mentioned this phrase because it's something that has allowed me to move through different spaces, whether filled with comfort or uncomfortability, but to find humility and to find grace, and to kind of find that human connection, which I think is so valuable and so important, regardless of your professional or personal space that you're in. And so after this undergraduate degree, I knew that I still wanted to hone in on this skill to really connect back to that service, right? So not just making travel about myself, but how can I connect it to a bigger picture of purpose? And to do that, I knew that I did want to pursue a graduate degree. Also financially didn't know how. So once again, Rotary came to the rescue and I was able to apply for the Rotary Global Grant Scholarship. Actually was interviewed by Jennifer herself and was able to receive a degree from SOAS in Humanitarianism, Aid, and Conflict. I could spend days talking about this year, but I specifically want to highlight my dissertation where I focused on, the title itself is The Efforts to Decolonize Localized Approaches, Humanitarian Aid Through the Lens of Afrocentricity. So from my experience traveling, I had seen the purpose and the power of being able to read history and understand history through a different lens. And so I also had a conversation with my grandmother, where my grandmothers do. She asked me, what am I actually doing in life? And I mentioned my work in the humanitarianism sector and development sector. And she said, you know, that sounds interesting, but you know, in Cameroon, we do that as well, right? It might not be called in the same way or might not have the same title, but it's there in our culture. And so my idea for this paper was to rethink what lens I'm analyzing humanitarianism and development through. So that's not to invalidate other lenses, but to think about if I put these glasses, let's call them Afrocentricity, what does it allow me to validate or to see that may have been there and might not have been strong enough in the other lenses? I say this also because I know I need glasses right now. So, and with that, I was able to look at case studies in Burkina Faso, which honestly seems so relevant now, especially thinking through Thomas Sankare's kind of autonomous understanding of development. I looked at case studies in Mozambique where I focused on the power of spiritual healing as a form of aid, a form of development. So again, this is not to invalidate other forms, but just to rethink what we have found as valid for the past however many years. And so with all of that to say, I'm standing here today genuinely because of this exchange program, the Global Grant Scholarship, but genuinely because of this Rotary family that I now get to call. I'm currently working at Results for Development. It's actually a 10-minute walk from here, so I did a little power walk to come here. And I'm really focusing on this bottom-up approach, this idea of localization, and with that, continuing to use this idea of lenses, right? Through my work in Cote d'Ivoire to my work in Mali, it's like, what lens am I using and how does that validate and maybe invalidate certain things, and how can I tap into local knowledge that's already there and so powerful and so prevalent? And really just keeping the rotary wheel turning. I love the rotary wheel metaphor. For me, it's such a great idea, and really purpose in thinking about keeping that work going. So not just about me, but how can I pour back even half of what you all have given me with these different programs. And just to end it all, just a quick question to see, raise of hand. If given the opportunity at, let's say, 16 or 19 years old, would you have said yes to the Rotary Youth Exchange Program? Let's see, yes, yes, yes. Great. And I think there's so many students that want to tap into this program, maybe don't know about it. And there's so many ways that you as a club can contribute and participate, because I promise you, it does have such a big impact when we think about personal growth, community growth, and overall global peace. So as a club, you guys can tap into. The district is already doing so much work. As a district, you all actually sent out 2 students. So one is currently in South Korea and one in Taiwan. And you all are actually receiving, I think there are about 5 students incoming at the moment, all from different countries as well. So you can also host as a parent. I use this picture of a chocolate above, because I went back home to visit my Belgian host family last year, and this was what was waiting for me in my old room, a chocolate, what contributed to the weight gain. But genuinely, I still talk with my host family, and they say they still cannot thank me enough for how much that experience poured into them, how much they grew from that as host parents. So that is also another way you all can tap in. You can also help with outreach. Again, word of mouth is always so great, and presentations like this can be an opportunity to learn about the exchange program. Financial support, as I mentioned, it goes such a long way, and making travel, the world, and this career and development sector as well accessible to people that may not have these opportunities. So just want to say, whether you know it or not, you were part of my journey as a district. So thank you all so much for the work that you do and continue to do. And I do hope you will continue to support the Rotary Youth Exchange Program. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really quite a story you had. You've had quite a adventure.
Thank you.
Thank you. How does what you did apply to the career that you're in at this stage of the game?
Yeah, and by that you mean the exchange program. Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, I think through the exchange program, I gained a new sense of almost empathy and understanding of the world around me. So even in my work today, I just traveled recently to Djibouti in East Africa, where I'm working with the Ministry of Education. So just thinking through how to walk those cultural differences and sensitivities, I think I started gaining those skills during the exchange program. And it's so helpful as I walk through these different spaces and want to be mindful and respectful of what people have to bring, and not just coming forward with, here's the answer, here's the solution. So I think I definitely can attribute to the exchange program to pushing that sensitivity forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you said that your host family had that gift for you and to say how much they learned from you, because I was thinking all the time you were talking, you got a lot out of it, but man, what other people got out of meeting you is special. So thank you for that.
That's really sweet.
I work with a group of high school kids, there are about 22,000 of them down in Texas, and they're all Title I students, in other words, challenged economically. I think they would like to know about this. How do we systematically get out to reach the audiences who would appreciate the opportunity to do that when they're 15 to 19 years old?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and something I'm working currently with the district youth exchange on in thinking about outreach. I think that's the best way to do it in terms of going to classes. And one thing we try to do is have actually recruitment starting as early as middle school, talking with counselors if they see any students that, this might be a good fit for them. So I do think outreach can go a long way, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And so I remember talking with some students, they were like, I didn't even know that was a thing, right? Like, that sounds so crazy, so out there, and so inaccessible. And even if you think that's a thing, you're like, I can't afford it. My parents would never go through with it. So I think outreach, not just for the students, but also for the parents, to show the benefit of this program. Because my mom always tells me, you go out there and you travel, but you have no idea how worried I am and all these different stresses parents. So also getting parents comfortable with this idea and the benefits that it does have can be a great way to push it forward. So, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to know, you were talking about your travels and, being thrusted into situations, into cultures that you were not familiar with. And my question is, were you briefed before you got to each of the locations that you were going to? Were you given any kind of briefing on culture and so forth? And if not, and when, how did you navigate through your everyday life, just with even getting lunch? Something as basic as that. I understand travel in that way. So just how did you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for some parts of my travel experience, especially with the Rotary exchange program, there was this briefing before, kind of prep and orientation. But I think to a certain extent, there's also only so much you can prepare. So with other opportunities where I haven't been as prepared necessarily, I try to go into it. And my understanding of travel is that you kind of get humbled to being a child. So going into a new space and having a child mind where you're going in and listening more than talking. So recently, last year, I went to Cuba for 3 weeks by myself, and I remember arriving at the airport, I was like, maybe I didn't plan this as much as I should have. But I did my best to prep on the Spanish, and obviously that helps a lot knowing the language beforehand. You'd be surprised how Google Translate can take you really far. That was actually how I survived in Shanghai. Pointing as well, great. It's so great. But I think it's all, really in the mindset, because genuinely you could read thousands of books, you can, watch all the shows, but your experience is going to be so different. So I think going in with this is going to be tough at some extent, and just being honest with yourself about that. It's not going to be pretty every single day. I think it allows you to move through. I'm just going to take a day at a time, step at a time, be aware of my surroundings, and just be open like a child to really just soak it all in. But yeah, definitely comes with interesting challenges for sure. Thank you.
But going to triggering off of what Shelley had to say, what do you think is the main impacts that you had on the various families? And then when you go back, like you've been doing it, have you seen that reverberating out to the greater community? Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, I think especially having kids around, being a host student, having kids, great way to learn the language. And it's such a joy I think for the kids as well. For families overall, I know my family, and I had 3 different families, very different families in each circumstance, but having tough conversations, you know, especially around sometimes political differences, or I'll speak for myself, being a Black woman, you know, being in a family that has never raised a Black, you know, child. So having conversation, very honest conversation, I think something my host mom to this day, she's thankful for, you know, not necessarily choosing the easy route with some things, having moments. My host dad, he helped me apply to NYU. I don't think I would have gotten in without his help. So that experience, he still talks about to this day of like, remember when we were like last minute putting this application together? So just those small moments, and sometimes big moments, have such a big impact. Or just being in the living room watching TV with them. I think there's sometimes beauty in the simplicity of things that still holds so much weight. So I know when I went back last time, I literally saw my host mom and we just ran into each other and cried like it was never before. So I think just, I don't know, everyone has different experiences, but I think there's a beauty in just getting to share someone's life and personal space that automatically can bring some really beautiful things. And it can be complicated. I've had exchange students or friends that had really not great experiences with host families. So it's not always a perfect match, but I think for the most part, both parties do gain a lot from the experience. So I hope that answered the question to the best of my ability. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
I've always been very impressed by Cameroon because some 40 and 50 years ago, the national airline ran on time, and the stewardesses were totally fluent in French and English, and of course their African languages. So I'm curious, were you from the Francophone or the Anglophone part? And when you went to Belgium, were you with Francophone families or Flemish-speaking families?
Great questions. Yeah, go Cameroon. So I am from the Francophone side of Cameroon. So my first language is French. So the exchange program, normally you aren't put into a place where you speak the language. So I kind of cheated that, but I had my good reasons. When I moved to the US, I actually lost a lot of my French just from, you know, being in school. And I think as a kid, you just soak in so much of your environment. So that was a goal of mine, to go to a French speaking country just so I could improve on that and connect with my family, right? So I knew that if I lost my French, I actually would not be able to talk to my grandmother. So I chose Belgium, and that was a very tricky situation because I could have very much ended in the Flemish speaking part of Belgium, but I was placed in Brussels and with a Francophone speaking family. So I was able to improve my French and even learn that through French, there's so many different variations and, you know, words and tones. I love the sound of different Frenches. So I always say Côte d'Ivoire, probably my favorite French because it's the same words, but the sound and the flow of it is so beautiful. So the immersion, I think that I also wanted to highlight that in my presentation, the language immersion is so incredible. I mean, my French grew so much at such a fast pace, but even watching my other friends that came in with, I had my friend from Brazil, zero French at all, like bonjour, that's it. That was pretty much it. By the end, he was almost completely fluent. And till this day, I mean, it's not the same as before, but he can still hold a conversation. And I really do think that is the best way to learn the language. And you'd really be surprised what 1 year can do, especially when you're forced to speak it. Like, if you don't know, you cannot go to the bathroom potentially in all these different situations. So a lot comes out when you're really put into a situation like that.
Thank you so much for the story. I personally, maybe I should say just like you, not like me. I have been the byproduct of exchange programs myself, and I'm here because of that. Although I was born in Afghanistan, but my family is from Brazil. So thank you so much. And I really, I thought you really wanted to talk about your dissertation. The title of your dissertation was echoing this. I'm not sure, I'm sure probably you have already heard of Mutua.
Of what was that?
Scholar Mutua. He's a sorry, I don't know if I pronounced the name correctly. Is it Mutua? M-U-T-U-A. So he has a theory that I thought your dissertation was really trying to echo. is more of savior and right victim and savior approach. I don't want to use the first. It says SVS, and you wanted to really talk about your dissertation. I was interested to really get your key message. What do you want us to know based on your experience and that approach?
The $1 million question. It's funny enough, I walked out my dissertation or my year questioning if I even wanted to be in this space, right? So my dissertation did focus on this decolonial process. So it was very much being super critical of the humanitarianism and development sector, being critical of its foundation, being very much more Eurocentric, and that it might, I very much try to walk the line carefully, but might not have served for some countries the purpose that it was intended to. And that there are sometimes, a lot of times, where nonprofits or NGOs go into the spaces being very much the savior complex of like, I have the answer, I got it, I can fix everything. And sometimes, most of the time, end up leaving the place worse than where it was at before. So it's my $1 million question every single day. But I think where I kind of concluded at was that at this stage and where we're at with both of these sectors, we do have to do our best to do better, right? And I think it'd be easy to say we just have to restart the foundation, break it all down, the whole let's just burn it all and start all over again. And I'm with that all 100%, but I also realize I could sit and talk about this in theory and, critique it all day long, but it is so different being in the field and being in those positions. So with the information I have, I think still being critical of the sector. So even at my organization, we're having these conversations of what does localization do? What are we doing in this space? Is it appropriate for us to be here right now? Who are we centering these conversations, right? So I'm very thankful for my project in Djibouti. We had to take a step back and realize I had to look up Djibouti at one point to start the project where it was in the map. And so it was just thinking about, we don't know everything. So in this project particularly, we had to hire in-country staff and we had to kind of follow their guide and guidance and just learn as much as we're putting out. So I don't have an answer and I battle with this question every single day, but I do think you have to try to also work within the system to somehow find some reparations, somehow find some good in it, right? And it's with the people, with the organization that we work with, always being critical, having these conversations and being honest of that. Sometimes we don't do great work and there are real lives impacted by this. So how can we make sure we do better, not just focusing on, we had this idea to do good and we can't stick in just the intention. As May had said, my big focus, like what's the impact? We may have had good intention, but what actually came out of this and how can we focus on that? So again, I don't know if that was a great answer, but more of an honest answer. And I think as different NGOs are grappling with this idea of localization, it's something that is still, I'm happy that we're having conversations on this. So, yeah.
Thank you. One last question from the room, and maybe it's less of a question and more of an invitation that I would like to extend. If you haven't joined Rotary already, we would love to have you. And really, this energy that you bring, I think, would really benefit a lot of other young children and the youth, and we'd love to have you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. That is very, very sweet. So I feel like I'm on the route to join Rotary, and I find myself Rotary will never leave me. I'm always somehow getting our paths just cross. Right now, I'm working very closely with the District Youth Exchange to really continue to pour into the exchange program. And I've been primarily working with the Rotary Club of Annapolis, who was the one that sponsored me for the Global Grant Scholarship. So I feel like I'm en route, but I did just move to DC, so we'll definitely continue to cross paths, and thank you so much for the invitation. We'll definitely be en route.
Thank you on behalf of our club. We would like to present you with the gift of a tree in your name. that can be located by GPS. So you can actually like find it, and that's a letter and a little pin. And to thank you for speaking at our club. And I really enjoyed your talk. So we all did. So thank you so much. And thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.